This is a CBS Reports Inquiry. The American Assassins, with CBS News correspondent Dan Rather.
The date was April 3rd, 1968. The place was Memphis, Tennessee. The audience was there to hear the familiar soaring rhetoric of Martin Luther King. The words were to prove prophetic.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop.
Less than 22 hours later, less than a mile away, a single shot was fired as he stood here, and Martin Luther King was struck down from the mountaintop, murdered by a sniper's rifle. What followed was fire and looting and terror, and the shock of an entire nation. 11 months and 6 days later, this man, James Earl Ray, pled guilty to the killing of Dr. King and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. But almost immediately, and ever since, Ray has backed away from that plea, said he did not fire the shot, and asked for a full trial. For 6.5 years, off and on, the case has been in contention, if not in the limelight. Now suddenly, it is both, and there have been public demands that the investigators of the King murder themselves be investigated.
I still think the FBI investigated thoroughly, but that's not important. We have been deceived, the truth has been concealed, and we now must do everything to know that the full story is made public.
Flight 12 delayed by blizzard.
4 more hours. I'll never make it. Here, take hold.
I've got cough drops.
Hold is better than leading cough drops. Read the label.
Has dextromethorphan.
Real cough medicine. 2 hold work up to 4 hours.
Flight 12 now boarding.
Hey, I've hardly coughed in 4 hours. Why get grounded over a cough? Yeah.
New Hold 4-hour cough suppressant, better than cough drops.
The 1976 EPA ratings are in, and Ford has the best gas mileage of any V8 pickup. Ford F100 with optional V8 and manual transmission was rated at 24 miles per gallon highway, 16 city. Your actual mileage may vary. Now compared to Ford's nearest competitor's V8, that's a 33% better highway gas mileage rating. Yes, 33% better. Think what that could mean every week, every month, every year you own your Ford V8 pickup. See the V8 gas mileage champ at your Ford dealers now.
The American Assassins continues. Here now is Dan Rather.
Good evening. This is the third broadcast in a series on the American Assassins. 5 weeks ago, in 2 programs, we looked into the murder of President John F. Kennedy. Tonight, we inquire into the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Like President Kennedy, Dr. King was killed by the rifle of an unseen sniper. As in the Kennedy case, there have been questions all along in the King murder mystery as to whether the truth came out. But there are differences, too. James Earl Ray is the only one of the accused assassins to plead guilty, even if he quickly withdrew the plea. Ray's is the only case still before the courts. Ray is the only accused assassin who was a career criminal. He was, in fact, an escapee from prison and had lived outside the law for a year before Dr. King's murder. And Ray, of all the accused assassins, seemed to have the least obvious motive for a political killing. Finally, what made the King case different from the Kennedy case was that it never came under the same constant searching scrutiny. Ray's present lawyers have taken it through the courts. A few assassination buffs have pursued the case, but it never kept for very long the public spotlight. Not, that is, until mid-November, when the Senate Intelligence Committee read into the record an anonymous letter the FBI sent Dr. King shortly before he was to receive the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. That letter said, "King, there is only one thing left to do. You have just 34 days to do it." Committee Chairman Frank Church asked FBI official James Adams what that meant.
I have no idea what it means.
Certainly no Christmas card, is it?
It's certainly no Christmas card.
It reads, "You are done. There is but one way out for you." What does that mean?
I don't know. I don't know if it means confession. I don't know if it means suicide, as has been raised. I have no idea.
That revelation produced instant and outraged reaction. Congressman Andrew Young talked to Lee Thornton.
I'm not saying that Dr. King's assassination was a contract job by the federal government. I'm saying that there was a climate created, an atmosphere created, that gave the impression that Martin Luther King was a danger to democracy and to America, and that somebody might be doing the director a great favor, or be doing the nation a great favor by getting rid of him.
Attorney General Edward Levy now says he is conducting a Justice Department investigation of FBI activities in the King case. And Ramsey Clark, who was Attorney General at the time of the assassination, has called for an independent Blue Ribbon Commission to look into the whole affair. 6 months ago, Mr. Clark told us that he remained convinced Ray was guilty and had acted alone. So I asked him after his call for a new investigation why he feels the way he does now.
Well, the revelations coming from Washington about the overall activities of the FBI and government regarding Martin Luther King Jr. have made it imperative, it seems to me, that the public know the facts, the full story. I think every stone must be unturned.
Surely those revelations did not come to you as a former Attorney General as a surprise.
Well, I'm afraid they did, yes.
Public reaction to the case has been more skeptical than surprised. Following the new disclosures, CBS News conducted an opinion poll on the central question, do you think James Earl Ray was solely responsible for shooting Martin Luther King, or were other people involved? Of those who expressed an opinion, 20% said they thought Ray was solely responsible. 80% thought he was involved with others, that is, that there was a conspiracy. Those are the public perceptions. Our inquiry into the question, did Ray alone kill Dr. King, begins in Memphis.
The language he agreed to could hardly have been more specific. Quote, at approximately 6:01 p.m., April 4, 1968, defendant fired a shot from the second-floor bathroom of the rooming house and fatally wounded Dr. Martin Luther King, who was standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel.
So there it was. The defendant was James Earl Ray. He put his initials on pages containing that stipulation, and 54 others, the prosecution claimed, tied him to the case. He had, in court, pleaded guilty when the judge asked if, quote, you killed Dr. Martin Luther King under such circumstances that would make you legally guilty of murder in the first degree under the law as explained to you by your lawyers. On that day, March 10, 1969, it seemed to be an open and shut case. But was it? 3 days later, James Earl Ray retracted his plea of guilty and claimed he was railroaded into his stipulation and his answers. So the case of the state of Tennessee versus James Earl Ray and his aliases, for good reasons or bad, is not closed.
We've been trying now for 5 long years to get him a trial. We've been to the Tennessee Supreme Court twice, the U.S. Supreme Court once, and now we're on our way, it looks like, for a second trial there. And until we can get him a trial in court, I don't know what can be done in that case.
That case and the murder of Dr. King cannot be understood unless they are put in the perspective of the times, the raw early spring of 1968 in Memphis. King came on March 28th to a town in bad trouble. Its garbage men, almost all of them black, were in the middle of a bitter strike. King joined a strikers' march to show solidarity. But that day things got out of hand, and militants broke his rule of nonviolence. King himself, obviously shaken, had to be hustled out of the crowd. What followed was the rawest kind of confrontation. A state of emergency, a curfew, pitched battles between police and blacks. Then the National Guard called in as the strike and the picketing went on. King left Memphis, but returned 6 days later. He had decided he had to lead another march to prove his followers could maintain nonviolence. And that night, on what was to be the eve of his assassination, Martin Luther King went to Mason Temple in a driving rain to make his last speech.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you.
The first time James Earl Ray is known to have been in Memphis was also the day before the murder. At 7:20 p.m. at the New Rebel Motel, he drove his white Mustang into the entrance of 3466 Lamar and, under the alias Eric S. Galt, signed the register. The afternoon of the assassination, Ray rented a room at the place on Main Street across from the Lorraine Motel. The landlady, Bessie Brewer, declined after the murder to be on camera, but she did talk off camera.
Well, when I first saw him, I just noticed that he was a tall, neatly dressed guy, and he was smiling. And I showed him 8. He didn't want it, so he told me that he just wanted a sleeping room, so I carried him over to 5B. And he said that was all right, and that's the last time I saw the guy.
The guy, James Earl Ray, went shortly thereafter a few blocks north on Main Street and bought binoculars from a company called York Arms. That was about 4 p.m. April 4th. This is information about which there is little dispute. There is dispute about what happened between the purchase of those binoculars and 6:01 p.m. April 4th. About what happened at 6:01, at least to Martin Luther King, there is no question. There were people with him. One was a local minister, a member of Dr. King's SCLC, Reverend Samuel B. Kiles.
My wife had prepared for this day. It was a Thursday. Had prepared what we choose to call a soul meal, and Dr. King and some of the staff was going to come. Somebody said, "Doc, it's going to be cold tonight. Get your top coat." He went back in for his top coat, couldn't find it, came back on the balcony, and we stood together on the balcony, right about where you see that, where the edge of that, where that enclosure is. Yeah, where the enclosure. He was leaning right in front of the room, leaning over, speaking to Jesse and Ben Branch. And just as I turned to walk to room 305, coming down the steps, before I got at about room 305, I heard the shot crowd. I didn't recognize it was a shot. I thought it was a car backfiring. But when I looked over the balcony, everybody was crouching down, trying to hide.
What followed panic and shock in a matter of hours that night was a mass explosion of the black communities across the country. In reaction to the assassination, there was an epidemic of arson and looting.
Except for the wars on our soil, the Revolution and the Civil War, there was never a moment in our history when there was more widespread violence than in the days immediately following the murder of Martin Luther King, Jr.
When you buy insurance, you want to make sure you've got an agent who's rooting for you, right? The Fireman's Fund has some advice on how to find them. First, look for this symbol. The big red fire hat of Fireman's Fund American. Whether you want insurance for your home, your car, your business, or your life. But just as important, look for this symbol. Because this is the sign of the man who sells our insurance, the independent agent, the very independent agent. You see, the man with this symbol represents not only us, but many fine companies. And that leaves him free to shop around, to make sure you get the best possible deal. Maybe from us, maybe from somebody else. So remember, when you buy insurance, look for this symbol, the sign of the independent agent. That way you know you found an agent who always roots for you. And when you put them together with this symbol, we think you found yourself a pretty unbeatable team. Fireman's Fund American, in the yellow pages.
The violent aftermath of the violent death of the champion of nonviolence prompted a massive investigation in which the FBI played the leading role. One of the questions raised then and now was, how could Ray, a stranger to Memphis, have been able on his own to find a location from which he could shoot Dr. King so easily and make such a quick getaway? Our inquiry provided a possible, if not conclusive, answer. We know Ray arrived in Memphis the night before the murder. We know a local newspaper on the day of the murder, found with Ray's belongings, reported that Dr. King was at the Lorraine Motel. We know Ray checked into the rooming house across the street the afternoon of the murder. Whatever else the FBI did or did not do, it constructed a carefully accurate model of the murder scene. And we filmed that in the basement of the new J. Edgar Hoover building. Using that model, it can be seen that Ray, or anybody, could have walked down Mulberry Street in front of the motel that morning and easily observed that windows in the buildings to the west offered a clear shot at the Lorraine Motel courtyard and balcony. By going to the front of those buildings on Main Street, it could be seen that they were used as a rooming house. There was a big sign advertising rooms to rent. And we know that Ray looked into at least one room which had no view of the Lorraine before choosing the one that did. So our answer to the question, could Ray have found that room on his own, is yes, quite possibly. A corollary question has been raised. Why did Dr. King stay at the Lorraine, which, as events were to prove, was an exposed location? A staff member of the Senate Intelligence Committee has reported that the FBI had plotted to discredit Dr. King by leaking a report to the press that he was staying in a white motel instead of one run by blacks.
I think we really need to know, was Dr. King caused to move from one motel or hotel in Memphis to another because of a threatened disclosure by the FBI? Is that what really brought him, whether purposely or otherwise, to that balcony at that moment that he was murdered?
The changing of the hotel is not a problem for me because it was always our custom to live in hotels in the black community, especially when we were mobilizing demonstrations. Our staff made the reservations at the Lorraine Motel, and if our staff had been making the reservations, we probably would have made it there originally.
Our conclusion, after checking with those who made the reservations and who were also staying at the Lorraine, it was not outside pressures from the FBI that caused Dr. King to stay there. His staff planned it that way. Now, another key question. How, with so many police on and near the scene, on riot patrol and surveilling Dr. King, how could the person or persons involved have escaped? In our investigation, we listened to tapes of the police radio calls that immediately followed the shooting. This was the first one.
Go ahead, Tag King. We have information King has been shot at Lorraine. You can't place again, Tag King. We have information that King has been shot at the Lorraine.
Not until 6:06 p.m. was this call recorded.
Tag 10. Go ahead, Tag 10. There's a weapon in front of 424, and the subject ran south on Main Street.
And a minute after that,
424, any physical description of the subject? 12 Illinois, West, young white male, well-dressed.
TAC 10 was a 3-car police patrol, local and county sheriff's men on riot duty. The unit's commander was a sheriff's police lieutenant, now a civilian investigator for the public defender's office, named Judson Gormley. We talked to him at the firehouse where he was when the shot was fired, and when the men of TAC 10 ran out toward the motel.
You came out these doors.
Right, sir. Then we went up to towards the front of the fire station here.
Were you running or walking?
No, sir, I was walking fast, or about the pace we're going now. And I went out through this double doors here.
This is the way your men came out as well?
Yes, sir. And then when I got out on the outside, I could see them running this way, and I stopped here, and I transmitted to the headquarters that Dr. King had possibly been shot.
On your radio?
On my walkie-talkie, yes, sir. Then I proceeded on back to the back of the fire station to see if what I could see after my men had already gotten around here. And I could see Dr. King over on the balcony and some of my men on the balcony with him. And I could see 2 or 3 blacks were pointing towards the building or one of the buildings on Main Street. And I figured since all the men were here and that possibly whoever had done the shooting might be over here, then at this time I backtracked.
Were you running with this time or you're still walking?
No, sir, I was still walking pretty fast though. And I walked like we're going now at this time. And then...
The police cars were parked where, right in here?
Yes, sir. Police cars were parked right where these cars are parked here. And then I come around this corner here. And, of course, I looked to see down Main Street and couldn't see anything.
Did you see anybody?
No, sir. I didn't see a soul. And I looked up into this lot here, this parking lot where they park cars, and didn't see anything.
Anybody?
No, sir, didn't see anyone. And then when I get approximately here, I could see these bundles, and I walked over here and I could see the end of the gun sticking out of the gun case.
And then what'd you do?
And this is when I radioed to headquarters that very possibly I had found the weapon that was used to kill to shoot Dr. King.
We timed Gormley's actions as he described them from the moment he heard the shot until he discovered the bundle at 424 South Main. If he recollects rightly, it took him a little more than 3 minutes. This raises another question. Could Ray, or whoever fired the shot, have escaped before Gormley got there? James Lazar is one of Ray's current team of defense lawyers. He says, in effect, no way.
He had to, within 3 minutes, he had to fire the shot. He had to clean the rifle of the fingerprints. He had to return to his room, wrap it up in a bedspread with an enormous amount of miscellaneous junk, and then had to go down the hallway, down the stairs, out onto the street, dump the bundle, get in his car, take off, and disappear from sight by the time Lieutenant Gormley is on the scene.
We put that contention to a test. Here is how our reenactment went.
Out of the bathroom and toilet, down the hall, into his room, the one he had rented. Gun in the Browning box, suitcase. It wasn't wrapped well, but wrapped nonetheless in the bedspread. Out of his room door, down the hall of the rooming house. The theory is that he walked, but walked quickly, to the main stairway of 418.5 South Main. Just before going onto the street. Onto the sidewalk. Now, right down here is where he would have seen that police car with the front of it sticking out. Theory is that he dropped the material in front of night amusement, trying not to draw attention to himself, over to his automobile. Taking off, so the theory goes, quickly, but not so fast as to call attention to himself.
Total time elapsed to the first stoplight down the street a quarter of a mile or so, well under 2 minutes. So our conclusion is it would have been possible for James Earl Ray or someone else to have fired the shot and made a getaway up Main Street before Gormley, the first policeman on the scene, could have spotted him. So far as is known, the assassin or assassins were not spotted and reported during their getaway. But there were a few wild minutes between 6:35 p.m. and 6:47 p.m. when it seemed police were in radio contact with a blue Pontiac on the tail of a white Mustang heading north from the murder scene. We have the police tapes, and we have tried to recreate the scenes they describe. The first message comes from a police radio car.
160. We have one of these mobile units at Jackson and Hollywood. He states that he's talking to some fella calling a Mustang east on Summer from Highland. That's both shot King. 160 is north on Mendenhall on Summer. This car is 160. This car is speeding over 75 miles per hour. 160, any full information? Supposed to be north on Jackson now, on the way to Raleigh. That's a hard top. He went through the light at Jackson Stage Road at 95 miles an hour, continuing north on Austin Peak. So, 160. This white Mustang is shooting at the blue Pontiac following him.
So what about that alleged false chase? Supporters of the theory that there was a conspiracy say those mysterious messages are evidence someone was trying to draw police directly away from the logical routes of escape, and indeed in the opposite direction from which Ray said he went in flight after learning of the King assassination. Memphis officials say the messages were a hoax. The broadcast, they claim, was made by a teenage amateur radio operator. He has never been publicly identified or penalized. Our search for the supposed prankster led us to a law school student in Memphis. He confirms that he was an amateur operator using his father's equipment, but denies having transmitted those calls of the false chase. He says he told the FBI this when they summoned him for questioning. He says also he was never specifically told he was under suspicion of making the radio calls. We talked to Arthur Haynes Sr., Ray's original American defense lawyer, about the messages.
I heard the official police tape that night of the shooting, and this was the most realistic thing you ever heard.
But that never took place.
Never took place, apparently. Never. And the fact is that the white Mustang that James Earl Ray bought here in Birmingham never had any signs of any transmitting equipment whatsoever. Anything other than the little custom-built receiver that comes with any little Mustang automobile. So, I don't know. Very strange.
Our conclusion, that whole incident was indeed very strange. Assuming it was a hoax, permitting it to pass unpunished and investigating it only casually hardly supports the contention that the state nailed down every part of its circumstantial case. In our inquiry, we've examined another question. Could James Earl Ray have managed to escape on his own? His evasion of a massive intercontinental search for 2 months and 4 days is either an odyssey of improvisation or the operation of a conspiracy, depending on your point of view. We know from uncontroverted evidence, some of it his own story, what he did. He drove the white Mustang to Atlanta and left it there. He made his way to Toronto, where he hid out for a month under aliases, managing to get a Canadian passport under the name Ramon George Sneed. He flew from Canada to London early in May, flew on to Lisbon, and spent 9 days in Portugal trying to make his way to Angola, purportedly to be a white mercenary. That try failed. So back to London, where he hid out for 3 weeks. On June 8th, as he was about to board a plane for Brussels, he was picked up by Scotland Yard. Now that's what he did. How did he manage it?
This, Dan, is what brings me back to the theory that James Earl Ray had assistance from some people who knew their way around, that had international connections and alliances and this sort of thing.
But author William Bradford Huey, who bought the rights to Ray's story in 1968, has a different judgment.
But Ray got his money through criminal activities, what little he had. Had Ray had enough money, he would have gotten away better. He had to pull little robberies. He ran out, he didn't have any money in Canada. He had to rob a little loan company in London. So there's no evidence that anybody ever paid Ray anything, and there's no evidence that any one of these other criminal contacts had the slightest interest in the murder of Dr. King.
Our answer to the question, could Ray have made his getaway on his own, is quite possibly. He has admitted committing crimes in Canada to raise money. He was identified as having robbed a bank in London, and he has never contested that. He has explained how he got a passport in Canada under a false name. There is no known evidence of any conspirator's help. There is the fact that Ray was pretty nearly down and out in London and Lisbon when he was finally caught.
It's coming to J.C. Penney, the greatest white sale on earth, with prices so low they're out of this world, because they're so down to earth to begin with. Every sheet in the store is on sale, like this twin-size muslin for $1.97, and this twin-size percale, $2.83. Incredibly low prices because they're so low in the first place. That's why it's the greatest white sale on earth, right now at J.C. Penney.
How's practice?
Rotten. I'm hitting the showers.
Well, after you hit them, Clyde, spray the shower with Lysol.
Lysol.
Lysol spray kills athlete's foot fungus.
I know. And mold and mildew and their odors
And do the shower curtain.
And do the shower curtain.
Lysol spray disinfectant kills household germs on surfaces where they grow, including germs that cause odors.
Do I smell fish?
I know. I'll spray with Lysol.
You'd never think that in a town like this, where the air is clean, the work is hard, and the nights are quiet, there are people who have trouble falling asleep.
It doesn't matter much where you live. Sometimes falling asleep can be rough. So I take Salmonex.
Salmonex sure helps me relax and feel drowsy, so I can get to sleep.
I know I have trouble falling asleep once in a while. I guess everybody does. What I do is take Salmonex.
Salmonex, it helps take the trouble out of falling asleep.
I'm not an actor, I'm a small businessman, but for over 2 years now, you've seen me in this commercial.
I'd like to get rid of some of the gray, but not all of it.
Grecian Formula 16 lets you control just how much gray you slowly get rid of. Some of it, most of it, or all of it.
2 years ago, I used it every day for about 3 weeks until I got rid of just as much gray as I wanted. It's as easy to use as water. No mess, won't rub off. Now, I use it just once a week or so to keep it this way.
Grecian Formula 16.
The trial of James Earl Ray was to have opened in November 1968, 5 months after his capture. But 2 days before the trial date, there was an abrupt, startling, and, as it was to turn out, very controversial development. Ray fired his lawyers, Arthur Haynes Sr. and Arthur Haynes Jr., and replaced them with the famous criminal defense attorney Percy Foreman. And he got a postponement of the trial. I asked Foreman how he got into the case.
His brother Jerry had written me almost from the beginning, asking me to get in the case. I refused until I had a letter from James Earl Ray himself, and when Avery asked me to come, I did go from Texas to Memphis and talked with him, and I was employed.
You're aware that he now says that, James Earl Ray that is, that he never asked you to get into the case?
No, I wasn't aware of that. That's the first I've ever heard it. I have his letter.
If Mr. Foreman had that letter, he does not have it now. We asked to see it. We were told it had been lost. It is true that Ray's brother, Jerry, did urge Foreman to enter the case. Ed Rabel talked to Jerry Ray.
At the beginning, Percy Foreman, according to you, said that he could get your brother off.
When he took over the case, he said it'd be the easiest case he ever had in his life. He said he'd be walking the streets in 6 months. And he said they don't have no evidence on him, they don't have nothing on him.
It's a complete misstatement of fact. I didn't want this case. I knew I needed, I figured I'd saved, and I did save that man's life. I did not ever, and I never do, and I haven't in 48 years of law practice, ever represented any results in any criminal case.
Whatever results Percy Foreman did or did not represent when he entered the case, the expectation was for a bare-knuckle contest in the Foreman tradition. It didn't happen. Instead, and it seemed astonishing, he pled his man guilty and settled for 99 years. Foreman's activities in the case are far from clear. By his own account and his professional history, he takes cases to be of service and for money, lots of it, or for publicity, lots of it. There was certainly publicity potential in the Ray case. The fee, too, was potentially fairly high. It was to be paid by William Bradford Huey out of the income from his inside story of the James Earl Ray case. But both potentials were cut off by the guilty plea Foreman persuaded Ray to accept. Huey's book lost a lot of money when it finally came out. Foreman got some $9,000 from Huey, not much by a millionaire lawyer's standards, and the publicity ended abruptly until Ray's new lawyers accused Foreman of failing to defend his client properly. But to go back to March 10th, 1969, the day of the guilty plea proceedings, there was a jury in the court. It listened to Foreman plead his man guilty, and the key items of the prosecution's physical evidence were also in the courtroom that day. Now, they are in the custody of the county criminal court, and under the supervision of Chief Clerk J.A. Blackwell, we were allowed to film them. We started with what the prosecution said was the murder weapon.
Yeah, I see that. These are the only places the fingerprints are on the door.
Where was that?
Where the paper is on the gun.
Where the paper is.
Yes.
Now, this is what, Mr. Blackwell?
This is a suitcase was found with a bundle of clothes and so forth outside of the room house.
Right. This is marked evidence, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You think that's a test shell? Definitely, that is. See, this would be another. Yeah. See that of those marked FBI evidence, there's 1, 2,
I guess 3. I believe we're finding that little brown package, the original one there. These are the test shells, it appears.
Yes, these are test firing, so firing.
That's correct.
This is the slug actually removed from the victim.
That's correct.
And in some fragments, there's a lot of that slug left. It seems to be in reasonably good condition. Other things in this bag.
I'll get that one just now.
Binoculars. Binocular box, which binoculars came in. Receipt from the York Arms Company. Bag in which he carried the binoculars. $41.55 looks like he gave for the binoculars. It's marked on the date April 4th. This is an interesting piece of evidence. The radio, 6-transistor channel master. Now, the investigators said this was a key
in tracing Ray to the scene of the crime. That radio had etched on it Ray's prison number. He had bought it at the Missouri Penitentiary. The key items of the prosecution's physical evidence were in court, March 10th, 1969. But what really mattered was Ray's own written stipulation that he had shot Dr. King. What mattered were Ray's oral responses to questions by the trial judge, W. Preston Battle. The key question.
Are you pleading guilty to murder in the first degree in this case because you killed Dr. Martin Luther King under such circumstances it would make you legally guilty of murder in the first degree under the law as explained to you by your lawyers?
Ray's answer was barely audible on the recording system used by the court. What he said was, quote, yes, legally guilty, For a case of its kind, the proceedings were extremely brief. Ray's day in court, including jury selection, lasted just one morning. Only 5 witnesses, the state said it had hundreds, were called. None was challenged by the defense. The physical evidence was not challenged by the defense. Case opened, case presented, case closed. Well, not really. 3 days after the guilty plea, Ray reneged. He wrote a letter to the judge indicating that he would seek a new trial. James Lazar, one of Ray's present lawyers, maintains his client had no alternative to pleading guilty and then withdrawing his plea.
Ray saw himself in a box. He couldn't trust the attorney who was representing him. He knew that an adequate investigation had not been made and that the attorney was advancing spurious reasons for Ray's pleading guilty. So he concluded that rather than have a trial at which would be faked, but which would appear to be genuine, that it would be better for him to go through with a guilty plea proceeding and then try to overturn that.
I try to save a man's life, rather. I don't want to gamble a man's life against the possibility of, as long as there's life, there's hope. And to me and to James Earl Ray, the evidence was so overwhelming that we both believed he would be electrocuted.
This raises the most fundamental of questions. How strong was the state's case? Since Percy Foreman chose not to make a contest in court, there is no way to determine how convincing the exhibits and the witnesses might have been to a jury. We do know the prosecution planned to present one eyewitness to testify he saw Ray fleeing the rooming house after the shooting. He is Charles Q. Stevens, whose room was next door to the bathroom. And we know Stevens would have been in for tough cross-examination.
What about the witness, Mr. Stevens? Oh, good gracious, we were looking forward to that one. We were looking forward to that one. He was impeachable as many ways as you want him impeached.
You think you could have taken him part on the witness stand?
Oh, no question about it. Furthermore, you had this cab driver, we called him Quick Draw McGraw, I've forgotten his first name, who said he came by some hour or shortly before the shot was fired, had a call to pick up Charlie Stevens. And then when he showed up, he found that Charlie Stevens was too drunk to ride in a taxi cab. Now think about how drunk you've got to be too drunk to ride in a taxi cab.
Shortly after the assassination, correspondent Bill Stout talked to witness Stevens and showed him a picture of James Earl Ray that the authorities were circulating.
Mr. Stevens, what do you think of that picture? Does that look like the man?
Well, excuse me, from the glimpse that I got of his profile, it doesn't.
It doesn't?
No, sir. It certainly doesn't. For one thing, he's too heavy. His face is too full. He has too much hair. And his nose is too wide. From the glimpse that, as I said, that I got of his profile. But that definitely, I would say, is not the guy.
In fairness, it should be noted that the prosecutors say that witness Stevens would not have been critical to their case. What the prosecution did specify as a key item of physical evidence was a section of a windowsill taken from the bathroom and sent to the FBI for examination when local investigators found what appeared to be a fresh indentation on it. Deputy Prosecutor James Beasley told the jurors that, quote, the proof would show through expert testimony that the markings on this sill were consistent with the machine markings as reflected on the barrel of the .30-06 rifle. That is not precisely the case. Under the Freedom of Information Act, we asked the FBI for their report on the windowsill. They complied with our request. What their expert testimony actually said was, the dent contains microscopic marks of the type which could be produced by the side of the barrel at the muzzle, but insufficient marks for identification were left on the board due to the physical nature of the wood. The final sentence of that report says, quote, no wood, paint, aluminum, or other foreign material was found on the rifle barrel, nor were any significant marks found on the rifle barrel. The key piece of physical evidence was the rifle itself, which the state maintained then and maintains now was the murder weapon. Ray admits having bought that gun in Birmingham, Alabama, 6 days before the assassination. He claims he handed the rifle over 2 days before the assassination to a mystery man he says he knows only as Raoul. What is also in contest is whether the single bullet taken from the body of Dr. King in fact was fired from the rifle Ray admits to having purchased. The main point of contention is an affidavit submitted by one Robert Frazier, then chief of the firearms unit of the FBI, after examining the following things: the murder bullet, Ray's rifle, and bullets test-fired from the rifle. Frazier, now retired, declined to be interviewed. John Carlisle, chief investigator for the prosecution, did agree to summarize the findings. Listen carefully.
The bullet has been distorted due to the mutilation and insufficient marks of value for identification remained on the bullet, making it impossible to determine whether or not the bullet removed from the victim was fired from the .30-06 Remington rifle found at the scene. However, based upon the physical characteristics of the rifling impressions on the bullet removed from the victim, it could have been fired from the .30-06 Remington rifle.
You said the magic word, could have. Could have come from the rifle. The FBI, in a sure match, excludes all guns but the evidence weapon.
But in this case, despite the fact that they removed from Dr. King's body a perfect evidence bullet.
A perfect evidence bullet?
In my judgment, just as perfect as if it had been fired in a laboratory under controlled conditions. Yet with that, they could not take that witness stand and say that that gun James Earl Ray bought here fired the shot taken from Dr. King's body to the exclusion of all other guns in the world.
Well, that's a fallacious argument. The bullet was mutilated to some extent, and I am no ballistics man, and the laboratory man at the FBI who examined the bullet, we were going on his experience and his examination of the bullet, and if Mr. Haynes thought he could have gotten James Earl Ray free by exploring such a situation, they had every opportunity in the world.
In point of fact, Percy Foreman, who had replaced the Haynes, elected not to take that opportunity. As we noted, he did not challenge the state's evidence. In our inquiry, we thought that the question, did that gun fire that bullet, indeed deserved exploration. So in mid-September, CBS News petitioned the Shelby County, Tennessee Criminal Court, which tried the original case, which is custodian of the evidence for expert examination of the rifle, the murder bullet, and the FBI test bullets. The purpose? To check the conclusions of the FBI man, Robert Frazier. I remind you that we were allowed by the court to film and show you the evidence. However, our eyeball examination and our filming, since we have no expertise, could lead us to no meaningful conclusions. Our petition for expert examination was turned down in Shelby County Criminal Court, and CBS News has appealed to the Tennessee Circuit Court of Criminal Appeals. That appeal is now pending. But as of now, our answer to the question, how strong was the state's case, is it seems by no means as strong as the prosecution claimed.
Marion, Alice just threw something in your dryer.
That's a cling-free sheet, Mother. The new fabric softener for the dryer. Cling-free sheets soften as well as liquids.
A combat zone. They can get rough.
red, dry, older looking. Your hands need Desitin skincare. It's medicated and 50% richer in emollients than even the leading lotion to help heal and protect. It leaves your hands incredibly soft, yet not sticky or greasy. Use Desitin skincare, the richer, non-greasy way to help protect your hands.
We have reviewed the state's case. Now, what about Ray's story? Well, there appear to be at least two versions. One he told his initial defense lawyers, one he has told his present attorneys. Both versions agree up to the point 2 days before the assassination, when Ray says he gave his rifle to the mysterious Raoul and arranged a rendezvous with him in Memphis for April 4th.
He indicated to us that he felt like he was involved in a gun-running transaction of some kind, that in the course of events, he went to Memphis, where he registered at the Rebel Motel the night before April the 4th, that he was directed to meet a person, Raoul he called him, at the rooming house, and that he did in fact go there, got lost on the way, arrived somewhat late, was directed up to the York Arms Company to get binoculars, that he did that, returned to the rooming house.
Then along about 5:20, Ray says the man told him, said, I'm going to shave, I'm going to change shirts, and you go on down and have a beer. This is 5:25. James Earl Ray went on down, had him a beer, was out in the street, standing there by his car, when the shot was fired.
The story Ray has told his current team of lawyers, and which they say they can document at a trial, differs substantially.
He was not at the scene of the crime at the time the crime was committed and had no reason to shoot Dr. King and every reason to avoid the difficulty with the law, which participating in a conspiracy to assassinate Dr. King would entail.
As we noted at the beginning of this broadcast, Ray's motive for killing Dr. King has always been a question. I asked the lawyer who pled Ray guilty what he thought the motive was.
Self-aggrandizement, self-realization, the second most fundamental instinct in human nature, second only to self-preservation, to be a big shot. He thought he would be the biggest man in America.
You see, he is also a morbid hater of black people.
Is that a fact, Mr. Huey?
Well, all you have to do is look at the federal records from Leavenworth. While Ray was incarcerated at Fort Leavenworth in federal prison, he became an honor prisoner, and the man could have certain liberties, but he had to move into an integrated cell block. And he refused honor status at Leavenworth because he refused to go into a cell block and with black people.
That's really just half fact and half true. What's
the truth?
Well, what it was, I was in Leavenworth at that time. And you could go on the farm after you got so short, 6 months. But a lot of people was getting narcotics charged on it. There's a lot of narcotics and marijuana out there. So I didn't think it was worth a chance. And of course, there's blacks out there too. But what it was a dormitory. And you could very easily they found some cigarette or something around your bed. Another 5 or 10 years. And I was real short, so I just stayed behind the wall.
Our conclusion, Ray's motive has not been clearly established. From the moment the shot rang out in that motel courtyard, there has been a suspicion of conspiracy. A suspicion that Ray was either set up as a fall guy by others or worked with others. That suspicion was reinforced rather than laid to rest by the guilty plea proceedings in 1969. The one point in those proceedings at which Ray rose to dispute his defense attorney was when Percy Foreman said there was no conspiracy. And now, as we have seen, the revelation of FBI harassment of Dr. King has suddenly transformed doubt into outspoken concern. In this whole case, the truth is harder to come by than the allegations and suspicions. There is no shortage of other suspected plotters and planners of the assassination. Among those we were told about in our inquiry, first, unnamed money interests. Why? To prevent Dr. King from leading his scheduled Poor People's March on Washington. 2, white racists. Their motive for wanting to get rid of Dr. King was obvious. 3, black militants. Why? Dr. King was too nonviolent for their plans and they wanted to take away leadership of the black movement. 4, the communists. Why? To stir up black hatred and foment rebellion. Fidel Castro, it is claimed, had a special interest in that one. 5, the CIA. Why? It had become a reason of state to silence Dr. King because of his growingly strong opposition to the war in Vietnam. The truth, of course, could best come from James Earl Ray. We asked ex-defense lawyer Haynes Jr. what Ray had said on the subject of conspiracy.
No hard information. No hard information.
Did he ever mention the CIA?
Never.
Black militant organizations?
Never.
Fair Play for Cuba Committee?
Never. Or any other list you can think of? Nobody. No organization. No group. Nothing except Raoul. Raoul, Raoul.
In following leads to the mysterious Raoul, we were steered to an almost equally mysterious figure who sometimes uses the name Cliff Andrews. He has from time to time offered to tell the real story of the King murder, and the offers have been publicized. We located this Cliff in mid-October. He had just been released from jail in Canada. We paid his airfare to New York, and in a cloak and dagger rendezvous here, he told me his story. Yes, he said, Raoul exists. Yes, Cliff claimed, Raoul and others in their group had been offered $250,000 to kill King. What group? The Quebec Liberation Front, he said. Why them? They needed the money for their movement. Who offered the money? Some wealthy men in the South. Had the group contacted Ray? Yes. We listened, and then we checked Cliff out a little more. The Canadians say their records show he was in prison from March 1968, a month before the King assassination, until long after Ray had been captured and sentenced. We have concluded that Cliff is not the most reliable witness in this case. The best witness, of course, is Ray himself. But on the repeated advice of his lawyers, he would not talk for this broadcast. So the best witness stands mute. And so we come full circle, back to what we know, back to the scene of the assassination.
Whatever else may be contested about this case, there is no doubt that Dr. Martin Luther King was murdered in cold blood on this balcony of the Lorraine Motel, April 4th, 1968. As perhaps you can tell, they tried to make a shrine of sorts of this place, walling off room 306, the room where Dr. King stayed, putting outside a quotation, "I have been to the mountaintop," from Dr. King's own address in Memphis the night before he died. And quotation from Scripture, Genesis 37, 19 and 20. They said one to another, "Behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us slay him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." Not many people come here, an average of perhaps a couple of dozen a week. But there still are reminders. For example, in the room where Dr. King stayed, behind the squeak of the door, the room where Dr. King spent his last hours and minutes has been made into a kind of miniature museum. On the walls, photographs of memorable moments from the King career. The bus ride at Montgomery, the march in Atlanta, the last march in Memphis. Behind this case, books by and about Dr. King, photographs of Dr. King and some of his best-known sermons, eulogies after his death. So we are left with a question as we stand here at the Lorraine Motel on the balcony where Dr. King died. Who slew the dreamer?
Furthermore, and in conclusion,
if you sometimes have a hard time staying awake during the day, maybe you had a hard time getting to sleep the night before. If you occasionally have trouble falling asleep, try Nitol. Nitol can help make you drowsy so you can get to sleep. And if you sleep at night, there's a good chance you'll stay awake during the day. For occasional sleeplessness, remember, Nitol.
Now for the customer with heartburn whose weekly bowl of chili tastes anything but weak. For the cook with heartburn who's trying to chill the chili because he's put in too many chili peppers. For the owner of the chili parlor with heartburn who has to put out the chili and put in a new cook. Alka 2, the antacid tablet built to fall apart. Choose easy, choose fast, and it works fast too. Cool and creamy, not as chalky, not as gritty. Alka 2, built to fall apart. Choose fast, and it works fast too.
Who slew the dreamer? The answer in the end is shrouded in negatives. As we have sought to show in this hour, the case against Ray as the lone assassin was not as airtight as we had been told. There was no smoking gun. No witness saw the shot fired. No one can persuasively identify anyone fleeing the scene. There is plenty of evidence Ray was there earlier the day of the assassination. There is none. He was there at the moment of the murder. The question of whether Ray's gun fired the murder bullet remains unproven. That bathroom windowsill as a key piece of evidence seems meaningless. The question of Ray's motive remains unproven. And what seemed to be unquestionable proof, an unqualified plea of guilty, is now in legal contest. Ray's case is now pending in the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. There, his lawyers have submitted a brief arguing that his admission of guilt was not free and voluntary. A decision on the merits of Ray's case, one way or the other, may come fairly soon. But there will remain the public's case and the public inquiry. Only then, if at all, can the broader issue, was there a conspiracy to kill Dr. King, and was government involved in any way, be resolved. A Justice Department inquiry, however thorough and honest, is not likely to silence skepticism. The FBI, after all, is an agency of the Justice Department. It is our conclusion that an outside investigation is now needed. It could be conducted by the Congress, or the public's inquiry might be conducted by an independent commission appointed by the President, with full powers to examine all aspects of the case. Now, perhaps more now than ever, there is a need to know who slew the dreamer. Monday, in the final broadcast of this series, we'll examine the assassination of Robert Kennedy and the attempt to assassinate George Wallace. Dan Rather, good night.
This has been the third of a series, a CBS Reports Inquiry. The American Assassins. The fourth part will appear Monday night at this same time. The CBS Friday Night Movies will return next week at its normally scheduled time on most of these stations. Follow the Texas Rangers as they follow the trail of the Dukes of Duval. That story and more on 60 Minutes with Mike Wallace, Morley Safer, and Dan Rather. Sunday at 7, 6 Central on CBS. This is a CBS Reports Inquiry. The American Assassins, with CBS News correspondent Dan Rather. This portion of The American Assassins is sponsored by New Hold 4-hour cough suppressant. Helps suppress coughs up to 4 hours.
Good evening. Tonight, in the last of our series of broadcasts on The American Assassins, we will examine the murder of Senator Robert F. Kennedy and the near-fatal wounding of Alabama Governor George C. Wallace. Two crimes where questions still persist, even though both were committed in the middle of crowds of eyewitnesses and the suspects were seized with guns in hand. At the end of this hour, we'll summarize our findings in these cases and our earlier reports on the deaths of President John F. Kennedy and the Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. 4 years and 6 months after President Kennedy was killed in Dallas, his brother, Senator Robert Kennedy, had just won the crucial California Democratic presidential primary. He was looking forward to a hard fight for his party's nomination at the Democratic Convention in Chicago.
We are a great country and a selfish country and a compassionate country, and I intend to make that my basis for running and over the period of the next few months. So, my thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
Oh, no!
But the road to Chicago ended only a few moments later, when Robert Kennedy was fatally wounded in a serving pantry of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Senator Kennedy was attacked at close range by a man firing this small revolver at his head and body.
Look out for the gun. Okay. All right. Get the gun. Okay, now hold on to the guy. Hold on to him.
The man, who turned out to be a Palestinian refugee named Sirhan Sirhan, was quickly subdued, but not until he had emptied all 8 chambers of his .22 caliber weapon. Senator Kennedy died a day later. The case of Sirhan Sirhan was far less complicated than the case of the accused assassin of President Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald. There is no doubt Sirhan was in the pantry, either by chance, as he claims, or by design, as the prosecution maintained at his trial. Witnesses saw Sirhan fire at Robert Kennedy. Defense lawyers never tried to deny that at the trial, claiming instead that Sirhan had been mentally impaired and had no recollection of the shooting. He was convicted. Since no one denies that Sirhan did shoot at the senator, there is one central question in this case. Was Sirhan's gun the only one fired in the Ambassador Hotel that night?
Quiet. That cough's going to give away our surprise party. I told you, take hold.
I've got cough drops.
Hold is better than leading cough drops. It's a cough suppressant. Read the label.
Has dextromethorphan.
Real cough medicine.
2 hold, work up to 4 hours.
Shh, here they come.
Great party. And I've hardly coughed in 4 hours.
That's no surprise.
New Hold 4-hour cough suppressant, better than cough drops.
Oh, you didn't get a deer, but you did get a cold.
So my throat's a little sore.
Well, it's aspirin and Sucrets for you.
Aspirin and Sucrets?
Aspirin for cold symptoms, and lots of doctors recommend Sucrets. It's got a medicine, and it coats your throat, too, so that little sore throat pain is relieved for a while. Then maybe we can go and buy some venison.
Aspirin and Sucrets, a sensible way to fight winter.
The embassy room of the Ambassador Hotel, June 4th, 1968. The night of Robert F. Kennedy's last political victory. A night when joy and horror were separated only by a few feet and a few minutes.
Senator, this way. This way.
After his victory speech, Kennedy was led away from the crowd toward a nearby room to meet the press. It was now just after midnight, June 5th. Kennedy was led through an exit just behind the stage, then a right turn, and into this serving pantry to avoid large crowds. There, waiting by a steam table, was Sirhan Sirhan. Suddenly, he started firing. Kennedy and 5 others lay wounded. Within seconds, the crowd in the embassy room knew something had happened. Robert Kennedy died 25 hours after he was shot. The investigation of his death was billed by local authorities as one of the most thorough ever. The conclusion? That Sirhan Sirhan, angered at Robert Kennedy's support of Israel, planned and executed the murder alone. At the time, the evidence of premeditated murder seemed convincing. Sirhan was seen at a gun club several hours before the shooting, and according to some witnesses, he fired hundreds of rounds of ammunition there. A notebook found in Sirhan's bedroom had such notations as, quote, RFK must die. Then came the trial, under extreme security. In April 1969, Sirhan was convicted. He was sentenced to death. That sentence later reduced to life in prison. Now, Sirhan will be eligible for parole in 1986. When Sirhan was convicted, he was convicted on the evidence. CBS News examined key pieces of that evidence. At the trial of Sirhan, the objects in this room were known more by number than by name. Numbers that added up to, it was said, an open and shut case against the defendant. Trial Exhibit 47, a bullet taken from the body of Robert Kennedy. Exhibit 54, a bullet removed from another victim, William Wiesel. An envelope marked Exhibit 55, test shots. Test shots from this gun, Exhibit 6.
a pistol fired by Sirhan Sirhan. Dry fires very well.
All of the previous exhibits shown, 47, 54, 55, all came from this gun, police tests showed. No one disputed that. But soon the dispute started, and those numbers, 47, 54, 55, were being used again, this time by critics who insisted that they added up to doubt that Sirhan's gun fired alone in the pantry. That doubt grew, and now a nationwide poll conducted by CBS News shows 53% of those questioned think others were involved with Sirhan, and 41% want the case reopened. We took a careful look at some of the questions that raised doubts in the minds of the critics and the American public. This is a close-up view of the bullet removed from the neck of Robert Kennedy. Police expert Dwayne Wolfer testified soon after the shooting that the Kennedy bullet and bullets removed from two wounded bystanders, William Weisel and Ira Goldstein, matched test bullets he said police fired from Sirhan's gun for comparison. Wolfer said that bullets recovered from three other wounded bystanders and this fragment removed from the brain of Robert Kennedy were too badly deformed for positive identification. Then 5 years ago, William Harper, an independent firearms specialist, examined bullets in the Kennedy case with a special camera capable of making microscopic photographs. Harper said the Kennedy and Weisel bullets showed a significant difference in rifling angles, marks imprinted on a bullet as it is forced through the gun barrel. Harper therefore concluded that the two bullets had not been fired from the same gun, so there must have been a second gun. These 8 cartridge casings taken from Sirhan's gun held bullets that are all supposed to have 2 cannelures, or rings, around them. But critics claimed Harper's pictures showed that the Kennedy bullet had only 1 cannelure, again suggesting the presence of a second gun. In recent months, CBS News and Paul Schrade, a victim of the shooting, filed separate petitions in court requesting scientific tests of the trial exhibits to settle the bullet dispute. Superior Court Judge Robert Wenke approved the requests, and these 7 weapons experts were designated to perform the examination. The tests, which ended in October, were conducted in secret, except for the refiring of Sirhan's gun into a specially installed water barrel to get new test bullets. The experts reported they find no substantive or demonstrable evidence that more than one gun fired any of the bullets examined. Only the Kennedy, Weisel, and Goldstein bullets were in good enough condition to be compared to each other. 4 of the experts say those 3 victim bullets definitely came from the same gun barrel. One panel member says he is very nearly sure the bullets match, and the other 2 men are less certain but can find nothing to indicate the presence of any second gun. Those findings virtually wipe away one key and persistent challenge, the claim that 2 bullets had significantly different markings and so must have come from 2 guns. That's important because it again suggests the strong probability of only 1 gun, and only Sirhan Sirhan is known to have fired that night. The entire panel, which included an expert representing Sirhan, reports that the bullets certainly could have come from Sirhan's gun, but the condition of the gun and test bullets make it impossible for any absolutely positive conclusion that Sirhan's gun fired any of the bullets. In the new tests, only preliminary measurements were made of the rifling angles that first led critics to claim 2 guns were fired. But the new measurements show no significant difference in angles. Also, the Kennedy bullet was found to have 2 cannelures, not 1, as critics had claimed, and it is consistent with Sirhan's ammunition. Former New York Congressman Aled Lowenstein has become a leading spokesman for the critics. He insists the test results were inconclusive. Lowenstein talked with CBS News correspondent Robert Shackney.
I guess the essential question is, initially you said, if we can have a test, if we can have a weapons identification test, you will be satisfied with the answer.
No. What I said was, if we can get tests and they resolve the questions, we will have answers. The tests have been started and have not resolved the questions. To say they resolved the questions when they didn't is to misuse the tests.
At the time of the assassination, there was a second gun near Senator Kennedy. It was carried by a security guard, Thane Eugene Caesar. Caesar said he had a .38 caliber pistol, which he drew but did not fire after Sirhan started shooting. The guard's gun was not inspected by authorities that night. It should be stressed, though, that there is no evidence Caesar fired his weapon. It turns out Caesar also owned a .22 caliber pistol, which he reportedly sold 3 months after Kennedy's death. That gun was later reported stolen from its new owner. Much has been made of this other gun by some critics. CBS News consultant Lowell Bradford was a member of that special panel of 7 weapons experts, and he obtained certain factory specifications for the .22 Caesar once owned. Based on specifications, Bradford concluded that Kennedy case victim bullets capable of examination could not have been fired by the gun the guard said he carried, or the .22 he is known to have once owned.
If you are lucky enough to get this new sweepstakes letter from Reader's Digest, just think, you could be one of over 30,000 people who will win up to $24,000 in cash. In the new Reader's Digest sweepstakes, $400,000 will be awarded, including that $24,000 grand prize. So watch your mailbox and be sure to send in your entry, because it's the only way to win.
It can torment anyone. Painful itching,
Honey, stop scratching. It'll get infected.
rashes, chafing. Don't suffer. Get Lanacaine.
Skin so dry, the itching.
Dry skin itching. Don't suffer. Get Lanacaine.
Oh, this itching's driving me crazy.
Burning itching? Don't suffer. Lanacaine's medically tested ingredient helps stop itching fast, and its antibacterial action permits natural healing. Itching? Don't suffer. Get Lanacaine. Also Lanacaine spray.
Critics are quick to point out that not all the questions in the Robert Kennedy case can be answered by studying bullets. For instance, one dispute involves distance. 4 shots hit Kennedy's body or clothing. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, Los Angeles medical examiner, concluded that the fatal Kennedy brain wound probably was inflicted from an inch away, certainly not more than 3 inches. Tests showed the other 3 shots were also point blank, fired from 6 inches away or less. But critics claim Sirhan's gun could not have been the murder weapon because some eyewitnesses insist it was never close enough to Kennedy to match Dr. Noguchi's findings. These witnesses say that the gun was never closer than 1.5 feet or more from the senator. Frank Burns was a leader of Kennedy's California campaign. He was standing near the senator at the time of the shooting.
You don't think the gun was any closer than this?
No, never closer than 1.5 feet to 2 feet.
And you know the theory is that the gun was held about this close.
It wasn't that gun.
Or this close.
It wasn't that gun.
No way?
No way.
Boris Yarrow, a newspaper photographer, was another eyewitness. He thinks Sirhan's gun was closer. Yarrow was interviewed by CBS News correspondent David Dow.
At any given point, it could be within a foot or less. He was lunging this way. Sirhan was almost acting as if the weapon, the pistol, was a knife. And doing this is an extension of my finger, the right hand of God or whatever.
Could you determine whether the gun was actually fired while it was within this 12 inches?
Oh, yes.
Within the 12 inches?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Despite the accounts of some eyewitnesses, Dr. Noguchi is sticking by his findings.
I am in a little bit of better position to explain or express my opinion because I am a forensic pathologist. I am not here to adjust the scientific fact to suit this circumstance. If a circumstance doesn't fit, there's 2 things. Either I'm wrong or their information is wrong.
The medical examiner demonstrated for CBS News powder burn tests used to determine the distance of a gun from the victim. He fired first from 1 inch, from 3 inches, 6 inches, and 1.5 feet.
So there's a clear, at 1 inch, a lot of smudge and a very definite and close powder tattoo. And from 1.5 feet away, no smudge and very, very little in the way of a powder tattoo. Now, in relation to the shooting of Senator Kennedy, what you found in the shot behind the ear was very close to what we see here at 1 inch away.
That's right.
This is a dispute in which we frankly find merit in arguments on both sides. But on balance, we conclude the murder weapon probably was close enough to cause the point-blank wounds. As we saw, there is no way to confuse the powder markings made by a shot 1 inch away with one 1.5 feet away. Barring future evidence of a second gun, we also conclude that the weapon was probably Sirhan's. Another important question has long been, could Sirhan's gun have been responsible for all the bullet holes that were made in that pantry of the Ambassador Hotel on June 5th, 1968? This confusing chart shows what police said were the probable bullet paths of the 8 shots reportedly fired from Sirhan's gun. Besides the 3 that hit Kennedy and another that went through one of his shoulder pads, 1 bullet each was removed from William Weisel, Paul Schrade, Irwin Stroll, Ira Goldstein, and Elizabeth Evans, now Elizabeth Young. All 5 of those victims recovered. 3 holes were found in ceiling panels. Now, that adds up to at least 12 holes, all made allegedly by Sirhan's 8 bullets. Police said 2 of the bullets from this gun accounted for 2 holes each, and 1 made as many as 3. So it all adds up to the police, but not to the critics. This has been called by some the magic bullet of the Robert Kennedy case. The police chart showed it went through a false ceiling panel, hit the ceiling, bounced back down, and hit victim Elizabeth Evans Young in the scalp. But Mrs. Young was bending over during the shooting, so the bullet may even have followed this tricky path before striking her. This photograph was taken near the pantry several hours after the shooting. One of the policemen, Robert Rossi, signed a statement recently saying he saw what he thought was a bullet in the hole he was looking at. Then a former Ambassador Hotel employee said he saw what appeared to be a bullet in this pantry door panel. Another hotel employee said police officers told him they removed 2 bullets from other holes in the door panel. Police officially deny any of these holes contained bullets. If any did, it could mean a second gun. The police explanation for 8 bullets and 12 holes is probably the least convincing link in the chain of evidence that established Sirhan Sirhan as the lone gunman. Police say 8 shots were fired by Sirhan because there were 8 empty casings in the gun. But there is no proof all were fired that night in the pantry. Witnesses are not unanimous on the total. Also, do we know for sure that the police found and publicly identified all the bullet holes made during those chaotic few seconds? Police recently were forced to confirm that they, quote, routinely destroyed the ceiling panels containing 3 holes and also 2 boards from a door frame. So any answers they may have held are gone. Police said a new inspection of the pantry area last month turned up no evidence supporting reports of additional bullets. But critics point out that such an inspection at this late date proves little.
Marion, Alice just threw something in your dryer.
That's a cling-free sheet, Mother. The new fabric softener for the dryer. Cling-free sheets soften as well as liquids, but they're so much easier to use. Just toss a cling-free sheet in the dryer where heat and tumbling release special ingredients. There's nothing better to put in softness. Take out cling.
Fresh fragrance, too.
New cling-free sheets.
Finally, softness made simple.
Look out, Mom! As long as there are kids and winter, they're going to be colds. That's why there's children's aspirin and children's Sucrets.
Children's aspirin for aches and fever when needed, and many doctors recommend Sucrets. They're medicated for fast temporary relief of minor sore throat pain, and swallowing's easier.
Going in? My throat hurts a little. As long as there are kids and winter, aspirin and Sucrets.
If there was a second gun fired in the Ambassador Hotel the night Robert Kennedy was fatally wounded, or even if there wasn't, was Kennedy the victim of a conspiracy? Conspiracies, as we know, are difficult to prove, and they're practically impossible to disprove. CBS News heard many intriguing but so far unverified conspiracy stories in this case. Some involved so-called programming, the theory that Sirhan was hypnotized by others to kill. Sirhan dabbled in self-hypnosis, and some accounts claim he was in a self-induced trance when he opened fire. Even with no hard evidence of a conspiracy, there are still many people who are convinced that there was one in this case. One man who holds this view is Dr. Edward Simpson Callis, who says he spent nearly 40 hours with Sirhan as a staff psychologist at San Quentin.
What is your own hypothesis on what happened?
My own hypothesis is that there have to be other people involved. Someone had to set him up. He would be the ideal person for the purpose because he could be exploited with the background of Jewish Arab intense conflict. He is the ideal person because he's a follower, essentially. I was a company commander in World War II. That's the kind of man I would have wanted in my unit. He follows orders, he's willing to die. He doesn't ask even many questions.
If there was a conspiracy, Sirhan and those close to him deny the convicted assassin knew anything about it. His brother, Adele.
I brought the question up to him, Sirhan, you know there will be some conspiracy buffs. We want to know and insert the conspiracy. He says, I wish there was one. Maybe it'll ease the load a little bit. But if there was a conspiracy, I assure you Sirhan is not aware of it.
Sirhan not only claims no knowledge of a conspiracy, he insists he remembers nothing at all about the shooting. Mary Sirhan recalls a visit to her son in prison.
My eyes were full of tears, and he looked at me, his eyes were full of tears. And he says, Mom, I know now this time you're never going to believe me, but I'm telling you the truth, that I don't remember I killed Senator Robert Kennedy. I don't remember.
To answer one final question, what kind of person is Sirhan Sirhan? CBS News requested an interview with him in Soledad Prison in California. He was transferred to Soledad last year from San Quentin. Accompanied by Sirhan's attorney, Godfrey Isaac, this reporter visited Sirhan. We talked for 4.5 hours. Sirhan would allow no recording of the interview. Sirhan appeared to be sensitive, intelligent, he was talkative, and he had a sense of humor. He said not once, but several times during those 4.5 hours that he simply does not remember the shooting of Senator Kennedy. He also said that if any other person influenced him in any way to do the shooting, he is not aware of it. When asked directly if he could think, even remotely, of anything that might suggest a conspiracy or someone influencing him, Sirhan said repeatedly, quote, no, if there is anything or anyone, I do not know it, Mr. Rather. He also spoke of his unhappy childhood. His mother spoke more about that.
All his life he was a victim. That's what makes me feel sad.
All his life he was a victim?
A victim. That's right. You see, we are Palestinian. I had all my children were born in the city of Jerusalem. He had a very, very much experience of terrible type of war. He saw his own brother killed, shot and killed, 1947. And war is hard enough really for an old people. How it is, do you think, with children? It makes marks in their minds, in their hearts. And you can't even, they can't forget it.
In the Robert Kennedy case, after our own thorough investigation, we believe the best evidence now available leads almost inescapably to the conclusion that only one gun was fired. Barring new evidence to the contrary, that gun most likely was the one held by Sirhan Sirhan, and there is no hard evidence or testimony that anyone else was involved. There are still unanswered questions in this case. We feel some of these questions could have been answered by now if police had been more thorough in some aspects of their investigation and more open in responding to legitimate questions. In some cases, there are no records concerning important police tests of the evidence. Potentially significant ceiling panels and door frames were destroyed. The Los Angeles Police Department refused repeated requests by CBS News for interviews and would not even let us read the still secret 10-volume report of the Robert Kennedy case official investigation. CBS News lost its court battle to gain access to that report. But despite unanswered questions and the speculations they raise, existing evidence is such that there is a good chance that one day, at least this case, may be stamped completely closed in the minds of most reasonable Americans.
This portion of The American Assassins was sponsored by Sucrets sore throat lozenges for fast temporary relief of minor sore throat pain. The American Assassins continues with the case of Arthur Bremer and George C. Wallace.
It took the FBI just 3 days to conclude that Arthur Herman Bremer was probably a lone gunman in his attempt to kill Governor George C. Wallace. It took only 5 days for his trial and conviction. But the trial did not raise the question of conspiracy, and the FBI did not publicly answer the questions that could have ruled it out. About one thing, there has never been any question. Arthur Bremer did shoot George Wallace in the Laurel Shopping Plaza in Maryland on May 15, 1972, just before 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Films of the shooting taken by CBS News cameraman Lawrence Pierce, provide conclusive evidence of that. Wallace fell to the ground, his life in danger, his political career seemingly at an end. Arthur Bremer, pummeled by the crowd, his own life in danger, was rescued by the police and hustled away from the area to safety, to prison, and into the history books, which some people believe is what he wanted when he shot the governor. But only some of the people believe the story is that simple. A CBS News poll taken in October showed that just 19% of those questioned believe Bremer acted alone. Nearly half, 45%, believe others were involved, that there was a conspiracy behind the shooting. In the 3 years since the attack, several questions have been raised to fan those suspicions. CBS News has taken those questions and tried to investigate them independently. First, who is Arthur Bremer? Is he a likely candidate for the key role in a conspiracy? Or is he a loner, unlikely and mostly unable to mix with others? Everyone asked, where did Bremer get the money? A busboy and janitor, he spent thousands on a car, guns, and travel. It is also asked, what could the Watergate tapes reveal about events the night of the Wallace shooting? White House plumber, that is, criminal secret operative E. Howard Hunt, says he had orders to fly to Milwaukee to enter Bremer's apartment. Why? And finally, did Bremer write what is called his diary? It appears to detail his assassination plans against President Nixon and Wallace. But skeptics ask, is it real, or did someone make it up for him? Now, we also considered other theories, including the possibility of a communist conspiracy, or the presence of a second gun at Laurel. We could find nothing to support those speculations. No one suspects conspiracy more strongly than George Wallace himself. Correspondent David Dick talked with him in the governor's mansion in Montgomery.
Governor, do you believe Arthur Bremer acted alone when he shot you?
No, I do not believe he acted alone. I have no proof otherwise, but I do not.
Why not?
I do not believe that a man who hardly made a living could accumulate the amount of money they said he accumulated and would be able to buy automobiles, guns, travel, stay at motels, hotels, stalk me around, according to the papers that came out in the press of his being in audiences where I spoke in different parts of the country, stay at the Waldorf Astoria. I just do not believe that he acted alone. I believe that the diary, that so-called diary, was a self-serving diary. I do not believe when you read it, you will feel that he wrote it. I believe he copied it and someone else wrote it for him.
Wallace said his personal belief is he was the victim of a conspiracy to carry out a political assassination, but he emphasizes that he has no proof, only questions. In a moment, our investigation of one of those questions.
Isn't it time you compared whole wheat total with the leading natural cereals? You'll see there's a big difference. 1 ounce of fortified total gives you 100% of the recommended daily allowance of all these important vitamins and iron. 1 ounce of the leading natural cereals gives you no more than 6%. Check the vitamins and iron listed on the side panels. You'll see 100% versus 6%. That's the total difference.
With insurance, you want an agent who roots for you, right? The Fireman's Fund has some advice on how to find him. First, look for this symbol. But just as important, look for this symbol, for the man who sells our insurance, the independent agent, because he represents not only us, but many fine companies. So he's free to get you the best possible deal. Look for the sign of the independent agent. Together with this symbol, we think you've got an unbeatable team. Fireman's Fund American, in the yellow pages.
The film that shows Arthur Bremer shooting George Wallace appears to record the act of one man. So we begin this report with our investigation of the man. Who is Arthur Bremer? Would a band of conspirators bent on a major political assassination find in him the right qualities for the central role in their plot? This is what we found. Arthur Herman Bremer grew up in this poor neighborhood running along the south edge of Milwaukee's Industrial Valley. His father, William Bremer Sr., says he was no problem at home.
At age 5 and age 8,
age 12. You never had great discipline problems with him?
No. With Arthur, there was no problem. Arthur at that age at all.
In high school, he went out for football one year, till his mother made him stop. Had a paper route 4 years, took guitar lessons. The people we talked with at South Division High School, those who remembered Bremer at all described him the same way. Loner is the word that comes up most. Quiet, introverted, just there, but also no trouble at all. He spent his time at home. We talked about that with Dr. Jonas Rappaport, psychiatrist for the prosecution, who examined Bremer for 9 hours before his trial.
Well, he spoke about his mother in the most derogatory terms. He felt that she was lazy.
These are all things he told you?
He told me that she didn't get up and straighten the house out. She stayed in bed all day. She didn't take care of the family adequately. She didn't have meals on the table. She constantly fought with his father. He claimed that she beat him frequently.
Whatever the reason, almost everyone agrees that late in 1971, Arthur Bremer changed. He moved into his own apartment and cut out his parents entirely.
We never got into the apartment. Anytime we went over there, he was there. He said, "Who is it?" I rang the bell, rapped on the door. I said, "Dad." Mama said, "It's your mother, Arthur." He never got inside the apartment.
He bought a car. He went to the Casanova gun shop and bought a gun.
To my knowledge, Arthur don't know anything about firearms. We never had a gun in the house. I wouldn't permit a gun to be in the house.
What made Arthur Bremer interested in guns? That question has never been answered until now.
He related a story of his having difficulty with a woman boss on the job when he worked at the Milwaukee Athletic Club. He bought a gun, and he took the gun and put it in his locker at the club and was thinking of shooting her.
That happened in November 1971. So we know now that Arthur Bremer planned an act of violence against a boss he disliked 6 months before he shot George Wallace. He planned other uses for his gun. In mid-November, the police in Fox Point, a wealthy suburb, picked Bremer up on a charge of carrying a concealed weapon. He had been parked here in a no-parking zone in front of some wealthy homes. What he was doing there has puzzled people ever since.
He had done some target practice that day, and he was going to go in and burglarize some homes or rob some homes. He claimed he had read a book about 10,000 burglars.
In Bremer's apartment at the time of his arrest, a thick copy of Gun Digest, further evidence of his fascination with guns and violence. It was in this turbulent period of his life that Arthur Bremer also dated his first girl, 15-year-old Joan Pemrich. It was a difficult relationship, Bremer possessive, demanding, accusing, suspicious, till finally Joan told him to stay away. Dr. Rappaport.
I think this was the biggest thing perhaps in his life. This is the kind of relationship where if someone says, "Hello, how are you?" and is nice to a person with Arthur's makeup, they immediately fall in love with them and then consider everything the person says as being meaningful. The fact that he had finally gotten enough nerve up to ask a girl to go out with him and had taken her out, and she hadn't rebuffed him initially, I think led to his feeling that this was such a tremendous thing in his life.
Rejection by his girlfriend only compounding the anger that Arthur Bremer felt at the world in general.
Medically, I felt that Arthur Bremer was a sick person, that he was what we call a schizoid type of personality, a somewhat withdrawn, shy, angry, slightly paranoid person who had a flair for seeing himself in a grandiose fashion.
Bremer's father told us how his son reacted when he won honorable mention in a photography contest.
He was not satisfied with honorable mention. He wanted first prize. And he did kind of fly off the handle a little bit with not thinking that he thought he was entitled to first prize.
Others told us of Bremer's unusual view of himself. Timothy Burns, his boss at Story Elementary School for 2 years.
He just mentioned to me once that he would like to get his name in the history books. And I would say that was roughly maybe roughly about 2 months before I left Story School.
Officer Michael Landrum, who took part in Bremer's arrest.
We told him at the doctor's office, we got word that the governor hadn't been killed, and I told him, I said, you know, you didn't kill the governor, and he was kind of startled. And he said, well, that's all right, you stay with me, you'll be a star just like I am.
In his diary, quote, "This will be one of the most closely read pages since the scrolls in those caves." Again, I'm as important as the start of World War I. Seeking fame, would Bremer enlist in a conspiracy to commit murder, even to die at the behest of others?
I cannot imagine Arthur Bremer ever establishing a relationship with another human being to a degree sufficient to become involved in anything at someone else's behest or in conjunction with anyone else. He was a total loner from his childhood on.
Bremer's father told us his son never denied shooting Wallace and never once suggested anyone else was involved. But the father has trouble accepting this.
If he did do it, sick or otherwise, do you think he had some help?
I wish I could. I wish I could really answer that. I thinking and not. I don't think my boy could do this all by himself.
That is the question we must answer. Could Arthur Bremer have done this all by himself? To our first question, who is Arthur Bremer, the answer seems to be, based on the almost unanimous opinion of all who knew him, a loner. And given that, could he have been drawn into a conspiracy? In a moment, 3 questions that are often asked about that.
How's practice?
Rotten. I'm hitting the showers.
Well, after you hit them, Clyde, spray the shower with Lysol.
Lysol.
Lysol spray kills athlete's foot fungus.
I know. And mold and mildew and their odors
And do the shower curtain.
And do the shower curtain.
Lysol spray disinfectant kills household germs on surfaces where they grow, including germs that cause odors.
Do I smell fish?
I know. I'll spray with Lysol.
Your hands are living in a combat zone. They can get rough, red, dry, older looking. Your hands need Desitin skincare. It's medicated and 50% richer in emollients than even the leading lotion to help heal and protect. It leaves your hands incredibly soft, yet not sticky or greasy. Use Desitin skincare, the richer, non-greasy way to help protect your hands.
One thing that seems to puzzle everyone about Arthur Bremer is where did he, a busboy and janitor, get the money to pay for his apartment, automobile, guns, and travel, his hotel bills and food, and even a $48 visit to a massage parlor? CBS News compiled the first public accounting of Bremer's true income. For 3 years, he worked as busboy at the Milwaukee Athletic Club. They told us he earned altogether $4,700. For a little more than 2 years, a second job, janitor at Story Elementary School, where he earned almost $4,000. He worked several weeks at the Pieces of 8 restaurant and earned, with tips, nearly $900. And he tried selling campaign-style buttons, called his business Button House. We don't know what he made or lost there. So his total known income, more than $9,000, substantial for the jobs he held. But what about his spending habits?
He was thrifty. He knew how to spend money. He knew how to hold on money.
He really didn't have any outside activities that I knew of. He didn't drink, didn't smoke. He didn't have a car to support.
For most of the time?
Most of the time, except for the last 2 or 3 months.
For 2.5 of his 3 working years, Bremer lived at home, paying no rent or food money. His only big expense? State and federal taxes, more than $1,400 by our estimate, still leaving him just under $8,000 to spend. And spend it he did, starting in the fall of 1971. First, a car, nearly $800 in cash. An apartment at 2433 Michigan Avenue for $143 a month. He bought an $80 handgun, which the police later took away when he was caught carrying it illegally. Started dating 15-year-old Joan Pemrich. Even then, when he ate out, it was often at this pizzeria, and when he ate in, it was frugal fare. Mrs. Margaret Pemrich, Joan's mother, told us what her daughter saw.
She just remembered the cereal being on the table and so forth and so on. I guess it was like something she mentioned about all he ate was cereal and things like that, you know.
She had the impression he ate a lot in the room.
Yeah.
Early in 1972, Bremer's behavior became more bizarre. Joan broke off with him, and he shaved off all his hair. He bought another .38 for $80, and later a 14-shot Browning automatic handgun for $114. Quit both his jobs and disappeared from sight. It was also the time George Wallace announced he'd seek nomination for president. At this point, Bremer had all the money he was going to have from his own resources.
As far as saving up money, I would say that he had a good opportunity to save up a little money, you know, maybe $2,000 or $3,000, just depending on what his needs were.
Martin Polner, Director of Law Enforcement at the Treasury and chief contact between the Secret Service and Secretary John Connally at the White House the night Wallace was shot.
What I recall was that an investigation was conducted to determine his finances, and that they found that he had in bank accounts or whatever for a couple of $1,000s perhaps, and that the investigators found that it was accounted for by his employment as a janitor or busboy, whatever he did at the time.
The Secret Service then examined Bremer's bank transactions and found they squared with his expenditures. We sought to examine them, but under law could not. We know now that Bremer spent the following weeks working as a volunteer for George Wallace in the Wisconsin presidential primary, living off the campaign when he could. Gray Hodges Sr., a Wallace associate in the campaign.
He had previously eaten with us at the Holiday Inn for breakfast. We'd be out on the change of shifts, and he'd eat lunch, and our coordinator there would buy his lunch, buy him a sandwich, so would I.
It was when the Wisconsin campaign ended that Bremer set forth on the 6-week trip that ended in Laurel. In his diary, he said he had $1,055, and within 10 days he spent more than half of it on high living. But then worry replaced confidence. Quote, everything was the same except I had less money, much less. Again, wanted to hang on to my precious few remaining funds. And at the end, he was broke.
How much money did he have on him?
A minimal amount. I didn't even count it. I wouldn't say it was any more than $2.
Where did Bremer get the money? He was thrifty, earned well for the jobs he had, was broke at the end. We conclude it is reasonable to say he earned and saved it all himself. Now, the second question that comes up most often in the Bremer case asks, what could the Watergate tapes reveal about the shooting? George Wallace has said, in a way, I am a victim of Watergate. Among the tapes at issue in this case are those recorded on the White House taping system May 15th, 1972, the day Wallace was shot. What prompts Wallace and us to ask about those tapes is the Watergate testimony of White House plumber E. Howard Hunt. He was questioned by Georgia Senator Talmadge about the clandestine operations he engaged in at the direction of Presidential Counsel Charles Colson.
And did he suggest to you that you go break in Bremer's apartment after George Wallace was shot down in Maryland?
He suggested that I review the contents of Mr. Bremer's apartment.
And you declined to do that?
I argued against it. I subsequently received word from him or from his secretary, I can't recall which, that this was no longer required.
Colson's call came direct from the White House, where he spent the evening with President Nixon. But he denies ordering Hunt to Milwaukee, saying in a memorandum for file written a month later after the Watergate break-in that he wanted only to discuss Bremer's psychological makeup with Hunt. Both Colson and Hunt denied our requests for interviews. Colson made other phone calls that night, relaying presidential orders to the FBI. But it is precisely the performance of the FBI that leads to other questions in the case. When reporter Rick Janko of the Milwaukee Sentinel arrived at Bremer's apartment, he met 3 men already on their way out.
They just stepped aside, let us in, and left, closed the door.
In that point, I was so enamored with the fact that I had actually made it into the apartment, something that I had not at all expected, without even having a Milwaukee policeman step in front of me and ask for identification. Never in my experience in covering stories had anything been handed to me so easily. I had, everything was there, and it was almost as if Bremer, when he left, wanted it to be there, or someone wanted it to be there. Things that a newspaperman looks for days in a story like this, such as names of friends, places where the individual worked, of employment, diseases he had over the years, any possible thing that might be interesting to readers. Those kind of things were all written down on sheets of paper.
We know now from this official Secret Service report, with names blacked out, that the three men Janka met leaving the apartment were 2 FBI men and a Secret Service agent who had been in the apartment about an hour. Yet when they left all this information behind to be snapped up by reporters and the public. The report also discloses that an hour later the FBI went back into the apartment under presidential orders to seize and seal everything relevant to the case. An obvious but as yet unanswered question. Why was the apartment left unguarded for an hour, allowing reporters and public to rummage through it? Also, was there any link between White House orders to the FBI and that White House phone call to Howard Hunt? The White House tapes may have recorded conversations that will answer those questions. In its investigation of criminal political acts, the Senate Watergate Committee asked Nixon campaign operative Donald Segretti about a possible link between the President's Re-elect Committee and Bremer. Senator Inouye.
Mr. Segretti, the city of Washington is a city of rumors, and there is a very persistent one floating around involving you. I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to this rumor. Do you know Mr. Arthur Bremer?
I do not.
Assistant Committee Counsel Mark Lackritz, who investigated dirty tricks.
We found, to the extent that we pursued those allegations, we did not establish any connection between Mr. Segretti and Mr. Bremer.
So we come back to our original question. What could the Watergate tapes reveal about Bremer and Wallace? We can't answer that. CBS News sought access to the tapes that could possibly be relevant, or to the transcripts of them, but Philip Buchan, counsel to President Ford, denied the request. For 6 weeks before he shot George Wallace, Arthur Bremer, it is said, kept a diary. Our next question concerns, did Bremer write this diary? It appears to record Bremer's travels as he sought first to assassinate the president, then Governor Wallace. But is this the real Arthur Bremer? It is a question that has eluded a definite answer. There simply have not been enough of Bremer's early writings around to say for sure. But we found more than 30 pages of Bremer's handwritten notes from a course at Milwaukee Area Technical College and compared them with a photocopy of his handwritten diary provided by the Secret Service. The spelling, the word theme in his school notes misspelled T-H-E-A-M-E, and in his diary, again, T-H-E-A-M-E. The word neighboring in his school notes, N-A-B-O-R, and in his diary, hate your neighbor, N-A-B-O-R. Letters are transposed. In his school notes, sculpture, with the letters L and U transposed. In the diary, scared has the letters A and R transposed. It happens throughout his writings. There are dozens of such similarities between diary and school notes. The pattern of error identical. Dr. Jonas Rappaport, we asked him if Bremer could have made up the diary.
I don't think that he could have made up such an involved story, and I don't think he would have cooperated with anyone else who might have thought of furnishing him with such an alibi or story. I just don't think he had that capacity.
In the diary, Bremer says he is going to Ottawa to assassinate President Nixon on a visit there. He goes, but he never tries, and Wallace believes the whole story the diary tells is false. But we found, whether plotting his own death by suicide or murder of his boss, whether following Nixon or Wallace, Arthur Bremer passed up all opportunities to shoot until the very last one in Laurel, Maryland. His money gone, further chances out of the question. Did Bremer write his diary? We believe the weight of the evidence answers yes. Our final conclusion on Arthur Bremer. We spent months looking for some clue, any clue, that might link him with others in his attempt on the life of George Wallace. Our own research and investigation has led us to conclude that there is more reason to believe Bremer acted alone than that he was part of any conspiracy. But we also conclude that the one question that still lingers over the case, what orders issued from the White House, ought to be resolved, if possible, by listening to the tapes that were made there the night of the shooting.
It's coming to J.C. Penney, the greatest white sale on earth, with prices so low they're out of this world, because they're so down to earth to begin with. Every sheet in the store is on sale, like this twin-size muslin for $1.97, and this twin-size percale, $2.83. Incredibly low prices because they're so low in the first place. That's why it's the greatest white sale on earth, right now at J.C. Penney.
When you'd really like to skip breakfast at your house, come on over to our house. We've got a whole world of food. Our famous pancakes, eggs, omelets, and waffles, too. So whatever in the world you're hungry for, come on over to the International House of Pancakes, your IHOP, for many good reasons.
This has been the last hour of our series on the assassinations of the Kennedy brothers and Martin Luther King and the near-fatal attack on Governor Wallace. As you have just seen, CBS News concluded that there is no doubt whatsoever that Arthur Bremer shot Governor Wallace and that there is no solid evidence pointing to a conspiracy, despite the worrisome problem of still-secret White House tapes and Governor Wallace's own belief that Bremer acted with others. Bremer himself, we found, is a most unlikely choice as a conspirator. We also concluded in this hour that the best available evidence is that only one gun was fired in the Robert Kennedy murder and that the gun was in the hands of Sirhan Sirhan. Despite some questionable police work and some still unanswered questions, the Robert Kennedy case, at least, may someday be closed in the minds of most Americans. Last Friday, the series examined the case of James Earl Ray and Martin Luther King. There, our conclusions were quite different. That case alone is still before the courts. There are substantial questions whether the evidence would have persuaded a jury, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Ray was a lone assassin if he had not pleaded guilty. That plea was quickly disavowed, and Ray is actively seeking a new trial. And now the public perception of the case has been further clouded by disclosure of the FBI's secret role in harsh and illegal harassment of Dr. King. Our conclusion was that the King case should be reopened and examined in all its ramifications by an independent commission appointed by the President or by a committee of Congress. On November 25th and 26th, we considered the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, a crime which has generated many emotional questions since it happened 12 years ago. The official account, arrived at by a commission of 7 prestigious Americans, headed by the Chief Justice and including the now incumbent President, was that Lee Harvey Oswald, a 25-year-old former Marine and one-time defector to the Soviet Union, shot and killed President Kennedy, and that Oswald acted alone. There was no conspiracy, the commission decided. But our own CBS News poll discovered that just 15% of the American people now believe that story to be true. Our own investigation, by examining the 2 most important pieces of physical evidence, the Zapruder film and the X-rays and photographs of the Kennedy autopsy, concluded that the best evidence strongly indicates that all the shots that struck the president came from behind, and that some, if not all, were probably fired by Oswald. We could uncover no credible physical evidence of a conspiracy. Now, we did establish that the Central Intelligence Agency and the Federal Bureau of Investigation withheld from the Warren Commission essential information which should have been thoroughly examined by the Commission and might indeed have altered its final conclusions. And that by so doing, those very agencies which should have helped to dispel public doubts about the Kennedy murder have only fueled those doubts. CBS News concluded that there should be a full congressional investigation into what the CIA and the FBI kept secret and why, and that the investigation should include the possible role of Cubans, pro or anti-Castro, and the possible role of organized crime figures. The CBS News poll showed that an astonishing 45% of Americans now believe there is some connection between all 4 of these crimes, despite the lack of any evidence linking them together. The only connection our CBS News inquiry could discover was that they all seem subject to a current public climate of suspicion concerning what agencies of our government tell its citizens. Conspiracy theories persist partly because there has been a general decline in confidence that our institutions and the people who run them are honest. There are many reasons for this, some just, some unjust. This much seems clear. Doubts about our institutions cannot be quieted by cover-ups of any kind. There have been too many of them already. Just as there has been too widespread acceptance of rumor as fact and blind acceptance of inaccurate data. New investigations, where warranted, may help. That at least is our hope. Dan Rather, good night.
This has been the fourth and last of a series, a CBS Reports Inquiry, The American Assassins.
Medical Centers, starring Chad Everett and James Daly, will return next Monday night at 10, 9 Central Time on most of these stations.
If you've got a tough problem, write action. Between us, there's got to be a solution.
She needs a job.
Oh? And he wants to see me.
Annie faces a delicate moral dilemma on One Day at a Time.
Tomorrow following MASH, here on CBS.